guessing you've seen the film.
I have, and Paul, I got to start off by saying congratulations on the film. I had a chance to sit down and watch it, and I really loved it. So, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to hear. I mean, I'm obviously at that point where I'm very excited and nervous to hear what everyone thinks. So,
Yeah, I was going to say that filmmaking is such a passion and is such a job that is for a lot of the time a love job. For you, how do you feel when your film is about to get released into cinemas for a wider audience to watch?
well, I think I'm very excited, and because in Australia making films is such a long-winded process in most instances, so this film has taken 6 years from the moment I stepped into it until it gets released, and that's a long time. So excited, nervous, and very, very curious to see how it is received.
So, Paul, tell us a little bit about this journey. As you mentioned, this journey's been going for 6 years. What was your introduction to Kid Snow as a film, and what was it that made you want to jump on board?
So, Lizette Atkin and Bruno Charlesworth, two of the producers, asked me to read a script that had quite a substantial work done on it already. So the genesis for Lizette was that she'd gone to a round table reading of a script that John Brumpton had written a long time ago. John's known to most of us as a esteemed Australian actor, and he's also a screenwriter. And John had also had worked at one point as a tent boxer, and he'd written this script, and Lizette had gone to a roundtable reading and loved it, and then had optioned it. She'd gone ahead to develop it with a couple of writers and John, and eventually they asked me to read a script, and I really liked it, and I actually thought I was reading it just to offer an opinion, but then they came back and said, are you interested in getting involved with the team, coming on board and helping us develop it? I did that. I brought another writer on, and for me, I love the characters. I love the world, of tent boxing. I love the fact that it was set in the outback. There's such a rich folklore surrounding tent boxing, and it's such a part of Australian mythology. And I had wondered quietly to myself why no one had ever made a film set in that world. It seemed to me to be eminently dramatic and have full of possibilities. And John's script was full of great characters. So that's why I came on board, and I brought a writer with me, Philip Gwynn, who had written Australian Rules. It was an adaptation of his novel, which had won so many awards. And we did some work, and then over the years, different writers came on board, and you have the film that we made.
I was going to ask that about you and tent boxing because, of course, for myself, growing up in Gippsland and growing up not far from Jackson's Track and places like that are synonymous with Australia's boxing history, and of course being a huge Paul Kelly fan, tent boxing was something that I grew up hearing about and learning about. What was that like for you? Was that something that you were already well and truly aware of?
I didn't grow up going to see visiting boxing tents. I know so many people who have. It's strange for me. Just in passing, I'd seen so many photos. There's a rich archive of photos of Australian boxing tents. And when I was at NIDA, I was also got to know Jim Sharman. And Jim's father and grandfather, of course, is Jimmy Sharman's tent, which is one of the most revered boxing tents in Australian folklore. And I'd also went on to read Jim's memoir, which I think is called Tinsel and Blood. And the first few chapters there are about Jim himself travelling around as a young boy around the boxing tents. So I had some awareness of it. Then as soon as I started scratching around, I saw this incredible rich archive of photos and memoirs and stories about boxing and boxing tents. And of course, we also know that many Australian tent boxers went on to have professional careers, Lionel Rose being one of them. And of course, like you, I was aware of the Paul Kelly song. I was aware of a song that Archie Roach had written about tent boxing. You know, all this added up to just fueling my intrigue and curiosity about the subject. And then to have a script sitting in front of me with such rich characters and so much drama, I thought it was irresistible.
So tell us a little bit from where you went from there. Of course, as you said, this is a script that's full of amazing characters. Did you already have some cast members in mind when you sat down to after reading the script, or did you kind of go into that cold and work with the producers and the casting director to try and find this amazing cast that you've put together?
You know, when you're reading a script, I think no matter who you are, whether you're a filmmaker or not, you've probably got some kind of ideas floating in the back of your head. I had some, but I just really wanted to focus on the script, which is what I did, and names kept popping up. But for me, the development was all about the script. I mean, I think that's always been the case for me. But, you know, casting is where I hang my hat. It's one of the things I think that's distinguished the films I've made. There's been some standout performances and discovered some young actors who have gone on to have wonderful careers. So that's where I was coming from. But of course, the casting process in a film like this, I mean, the film's so epic. It's epic in terms of its landscape and its setting, and the film also balances so many different characters and so many subplots. And that was always going to be hard to juggle. And so once I started casting, I had my heart set on a few of the people who appear in the film.
Definitely. So tell us a little bit about that journey. Did you then approach those actors about their roles, or did you have any auditions for any of the roles as well?
Yeah, we did a lot of auditions. I mean, the two Irish brothers, Kid and Rory, of course, we were determined to cast them out of England. And so that was a long-winded process, complicated by COVID and different actors' availabilities, and the fact that post-COVID, of course, there was this rush for productions to get back on track. But, you know, when it came to the Indigenous actors, for instance, I certainly was aware of Mark Cole-Smith and Hunter and Shaka. Nathan Phillips had worked with me on my first film. I was casting around for the role of Sonny, and I thought there was quite a few wonderful Australian actresses who were worth talking to, and it was just serendipitous that Phoebe was available and was up for the role. I mean, I think that's a very challenging role, just not for an actress as well, you know, the character itself, but to find yourself stranded out in the middle of Western Australia in Kalgoorlie and simply be, for all intents and purposes, the only female in the cast, really, was a real challenge. So for me, the casting's always about digging deep and scratching around for people. I think casting children's always hazardous. We saw a lot of potential kids with a lot of potential, but that's a very hard character to cast. And really, at the very, very last minute, we happened upon Jack Latour, who I think is wonderful in the film.
Definitely, and the boxing scenes in this film are so natural. Was Billy already? Did he have boxing skills before he came on board, or did he go away and work on that? Because, like I said, the boxing sequences in this film are so natural. It feels like he was a natural for that role.
Yeah, he one of the requirements talking to actors when I was casting the role of Kid was that they would have to do a lot of training. I mean, Billy had done some very rudimentary boxing, but very, very much just part of his fitness regime. So he was going to have to do a lot of hard work. He was going to have to do a lot of hard work with his accent work. So that all began back in England when he came on board. The stunt guys put him through a pretty intense training regime. Same for Tristan Gorey, who plays Hammer. Tristan had never boxed before, but by the end of many months of training, he was a very accomplished boxer in his own right. Neither Billy nor Tristan wanted to have stand-ins or doubles. So, that's always, you shoot those scenes with your heart in your mouth because obviously things can go wrong. When people are... So all this stuff's choreographed in great detail and with great care. But as you know, you can step one half an inch closer and suddenly the glove that's is landing on your nose. So there's hazards involved in doing those scenes, and I thought both of those guys just stepped up in an incredible way and took the risks. And I think the scenes feel very, very natural, and I think the scenes feel pretty authentic.
Definitely. You mentioned as a director watching those scenes with heart and mouth. I remember recently I spoke to the cast of Life After Fighting, the Australian action film that's out at the moment, and they were saying there was a few broken bones during some of those sequences. Did you have any injuries on set, or did you get lucky that way?
Sometimes a glove would slip through, and we had doctors on set, so you're checking for concussion. Tristan's a very, very big guy and had worked out so much and was packing an enormous amount of power in those punches. A couple of them slipped through and hit Billy in the face. Likewise, even when you're hitting someone's body, that's very, very dangerous. So, yeah, I was enjoying it, but it was also scary at times as well because the two guys were really going for it. You can't hold back in those scenes. Your commitment has to be 100%, and you have to trust the stunt guys who have done the training, who have choreographed the scenes with you and with the boxers. And you do. You have to be intrepid, but you also have to be very, very careful. And there were moments when, looking back on the some of the shots in slow mo, I went, "Oh my God, that's just gone straight through." So of course, doctors are chasing them into the ring and checking they're okay.
The other thing too that makes Kids Know stand apart from a lot of other films that are out there that center around boxing is the fact that this is a film that's got real heart, but it's also a film that's very character driven. I know I talk to people who go along and watch boxing films, and they say they hate it when a boxing film just turns into two guys bashing each other for the second half of the film. How important was that to you with this film to keep it character driven?
Yeah, that was my real attraction to the project, Dave. I didn't want to make a boxing film. I'm very, very fond of boxing films as a genre. We all know there are some very great films, whether it's obviously Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull, or whether it's a John Huston film called Fat City. And all during the 40s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, there's lots of classic film noirs that are centered around professional boxing and the corruption involved. So I love that as a genre, but that's not what I was really attracted to. I mean, I do love the world of tent boxing more than I do of professional boxing. But it was the characters, and it was the fact that the story is about two brothers who have this totally dysfunctional relationship that's haunted by things that happened in the past, and that a woman comes between them, and a woman who is running for her life from domestic violence and has also a haunted past, and lands herself in almost the worst possible place she could find herself, which is around these men who are violent and that was the attraction, just the depth of the characters and the complicated relationships. And like I say, the film does juggle a lot of subplots and other characters.
Was that difficult juggling those subplots? Because I know when you're in screenwriting classes, so quite often a lecturer or another screenwriter who's teaching those classes will say, "Oh, be careful, I think there's too many subplots there." Was that something that you all discussed? Because it seems to come together so well in the film.
Of course, we were aware of it, and we knew that it was going to be a juggling act, and there's no doubt that my experience is that some people come to me and say they wish there was more scenes with the Indigenous guys because the camaraderie between them and Kid Snow is so wonderful. But the story was always going to be focused on Kid and Sonny and Rory, and so it was a challenge balancing all those things and not letting any of them become too dominant, but also letting the audience enjoy those characters. I think there's no better example of that than Darcy.
Yeah.
I mean, all the screenings that we've done, the audience reaction to Darcy, who throws a lot of humour in there and a bit of light to sometimes some of the darker scenes. So, it is critically important to find that balance. And as I said, the film is epic in every way, and not only in terms of its landscape and its storytelling, but just the characters that populate the film.
Well, I mentioned before a little bit about the naturalness of this film as well, and I think one of the things that helps with that and also its epic nature is the set design and things like that. You mentioned before about going back and looking at photos of tent boxing rings and tent boxing history. Did that play a big hand in the set design for this film as well? Because that looks absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I think that Clayton Jauncey, who's the production designer, who'd come on board many years ago when we were still developing the script, I made a trip to Western Australia and met Clayton, who was very, very excited about the potential. I think his work is remarkable. Likewise, the work of cinematographer Gary Phillips. So obviously, making a period film, you don't want to get lost in the period. You can find yourself getting sidetracked by trying to be authentic. But on the other hand, we were very worried about the boxing tent. We realised that it was going to be critical to the film, and we happened upon someone who led us to Michael Karatiana, who is one of the characters in the film and is also owned the boxing tent. So Michael, we found out through various people that Michael was living in Tullamore outside Dubbo, and that in his shed he had Roy Bell's boxing tent. So after Jimmy Sharman's boxing troupe, Roy Bell's is probably the most famous boxing tent in Australian boxing history. And I flew out to Dubbo and went to see Michael, and lo and behold, he'd set it up. And this is the tent that had spent 100 years travelling around Australia and was mothballed for a short time. And he'd pulled it out and set it up, and it was a revelation. And I literally drove up to the tent, got out, switched my phone on and rang Clayton and the producers up and said, "We've found the tent," because the idea of reproducing that tent was always going to be maybe a bridge too far. Yeah. But if it wasn't, one way or another, we would have had to build the tent. But to find the tent and to find the authentic, real tent with its history, with its soaked in blood, sweat and beer, was quite remarkable. And Michael agreed to drive the tent from Dubbo across the Nullarbor to Western Australia. And we were very, very lucky. But Michael was also a wonderful advisor to us because he'd worked in boxing tents himself as a boxer and as a spruiker. He became intrinsic to the production, and his work was remarkable as well. But the work that Clayton's done across the film, I think, is exceptional. And I think even the vehicles, the other scenes with outside the boxing tent, everything just came together. It's serendipitous.
Definitely. Well, Paul, we are right out of time, so I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us today, and also, once again, congratulate you on making such a great Australian film. So thank you so much.
It was really a great pleasure talking to you, Dave. Thanks.